And when rapid speed down to 2500.
Point wherever you reduce speed to 180.
BlackBox.
So, hey, good morning. Thanks for joining us again today on KP's BlackBox. I have the honor and the privilege today of having family with me, as in-laws, a.k.a. outlaws.
Outlaws,
Yeah.
There you go.
Cleaning our guns and staking our claims. So, pleasure to have my good friend, my family member, Mr. Doug Miller, who is the father extraordinaire of our producer, director. What would Ian be in your world, Doug?
Probably director.
Director.
Yeah, because he's cutting and he's pointing the cameras, making pictures.
Chief cook, chief bottle washer.
There you go.
Behind
Small operation.
Behind the operation over here on the video board. Black Magic, I think it's called. That thing?
Yeah, back there, that thing.
I'm not sure what it is. And then the other magic of sound over there, Mr. Noah Baker, who also seconds as my right-hand man, pair planner in the financial business.
There you go.
Anyways, I belabor that introduction of trying to introduce you, but making it about your sons.
There you go. All multi-talented people over there.
Yeah.
Doing multi-talented things.
The Millers, who are experts in the world of film and what Pam's definition?
Television. We
television
both,
production, right?
Yeah, we both have kind of feet in film production and television production. That's where we've come up through. Experts is an interesting word. I'm not
Authority.
sure. At least we're old and we've done a lot of things, so
I can
a good
relate
deal of
to that.
experience.
Yeah.
So,
well, you're at the academic level, teaching other young people
very true
how to do this, and
very true.
What an interesting time to be teaching, right? With COVID-19.
This last year has been totally crazy.
Can we get one of these? And
please, let's
2020.
rewind 2020. Although it's got to change, we can't rewind it and do it the same way again.
Right.
This has been crazy.
Although we could. I mean, the world has been known to throw some curveballs.
Yeah, it's in some ways it sucked the joy out of everything. One of the things I've been saying to people when they say, "How's it going?" It's, well, we're making the best of a bad situation.
Yeah.
The joy that I get from teaching is face-to-face contact, working, mentoring, working closely with people. When you're talking about the arts and you're talking about film as an art and raising artists, maturing artists, it's really hard to do that distance. It's really hard to do that over a computer. Not impossible.
So does Liberty, and by the way, you're a professor at Liberty University.
Currently, yep.
The great Liberty University. They've got a little bit of my money, and
there you go.
My daughter.
You have some ties.
Yeah.
You have some ties there back a ways.
Way back. My dad, all the way back to when it was the Bible school.
There you go.
Those of you who don't know, my dad was a Baptist minister. And, had some ties in with the late, great Mr. Dr. Jerry Falwell. Love him, hate him. I love a person regardless of whether you like their views or not. I love a person who stays true to their views and to their beliefs.
But, he grew.
Yeah.
My parents were very fond of him, even though we were in upstate New York and not southern at all. But my mom and dad both watched him quite a bit, and that was way before. And I have a niece who went to Liberty in the 80s, I think. It was either 80s or in early 90s. I think it was 80s. And, and I never thought I'd be there, but we're there now.
Yeah.
But Dr. Falwell grew quite a bit and changed, and he wasn't afraid to be strong and outspoken on things, but he also wasn't afraid to change views and modify his direction.
Yeah. Well, I think in the true definition of God's love, he was able to say, well, look, I'm not going to cash out on my views here, but I'm going to allow you to have an opinion. and we're going to still try to get along. And you know, cheers to that. And like a good Christian, I'm going to toast here. And you've got your coffee.
I've got my coffee.
Or dark juice.
Well,
it's coffee.
It's coffee.
We can verify.
Yeah.
But, you know, we start out our podcasts always trying to pay homage to something close to my heart is our military. You know, being a Marine, and once a Marine, always a Marine.
There you
I think
go.
it's important to salute those who are still in, as far as I know, I could be wrong. You can fact check me on this, Noah, if you want to. But the world's only volunteer force that has stayed, like we've met our recruiting goals. I think Israel has a volunteer force. No, they don't, because every
it's
citizen. It's
compulsory that everybody serve.
That's right. I stand corrected.
Yeah, I think there's some definite advantages to the idea of getting everybody to understand that they need to serve.
And I think maybe what the misnomer for me was they want to serve.
Yes.
You know, they understand being in that little hot spot that it's important to be patriots.
One of the things they do that I think is we need to do as Americans, when you're in, as I understand it, when you're in the service of the Israeli Defense Forces, you travel around the country and you see the country so you know what you're protecting.
Yeah.
And you see what the history, the heritage. When I was over there, I saw soldiers everywhere, and a lot of times they were touring. They were on the Mount of Olives looking at Jerusalem. They were in the Old City in Jerusalem. They were I happened to be at the Museum of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Mm-hmm. That's cool.
And there was a platoon of soldiers there. And, you know, they're getting an education and an understanding of what their country is. I don't think enough Americans really understand this vast country that we have and how wonderful it really is.
Let's talk about that a little bit today. But before we do, just want to say cheers to our military.
Cheers.
And to our allies.
Amen.
Who put it out there on the line every day. So thank you. And thank you to Blue Label, who is not a sponsor, but they do a great job with a blended scotch.
There you go. Good stuff.
Yeah, it's my favorite. That's why I have it here. And we've been through a bottle that size already. And I think, what episode is this, Ian? 15. So there may be some partaking outside when the cameras are off.
There you go.
But yeah, this bottle here is for our guests and
very cool.
For those who have the ability to toast.
There you go.
We know you follow guidelines, that you're following that strict guideline of your employer. And cheers to staying true to those guidelines. So,
there you go.
Liberty, he did not. That bottle, it's empty.
There you go.
You can see. So just so we're putting it out there.
In spirit, I was lifting my coffee.
That's right. You can still toast those.
Amen.
Doesn't matter what's in the glass. So.
True.
So, you know, bringing it back in your field, I'm intrigued with your field, because being able to tell a story, I mean, I know how hard it is just to sit over here and for an hour to be able to host and gather information from the person that I'm intrigued to hear, you know, your life story. But to be able to take that as a director, from a lighting guy, to bring all of these people together and put a product out there that people will pay attention to for 2 hours, a lot of times, in a full feature film.
Mm-hmm. Or
that's
over 30 or more episodes of a television show.
And to keep people engaged, you got to be really good at your craft.
Mm-hmm.
So you get the pleasure and the honor to teach that, but you also have a side gig. Sometimes you'll do things, or you used to, I think. I don't know if you have now in academic.
We still, actually, quite a bit.
Yeah.
One of the things I fell prey to early on was the lie that those who can't do teach. And of course, Woody Allen said, "Those who can't do teach, and those who can't teach Jim." That's a steal from a Woody Allen film. But
there's probably some truth in that.
Well, yeah, and that's what kind of makes it funny. But
And those who are good at gym join the Marines. Just kidding.
although what's funny about that was one of my gym teachers when I was in high school was a former Marine.
Of course he was.
Yeah, I actually think we had 2 that were Marines. I know one for sure.
And then when they would hand out crayons, they would eat them.
Well,
right?
there,
Yeah.
there you go. I remember he was incredibly good aim with a dodgeball and could pick students off from about 50 yards. So he.
Do you know
obviously
the
was a
quote?
sniper.
If you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Bringing up some movies.
There
Yeah.
you go. One of the things I've always done is taught what I do, and I still am doing it. The program I'm involved with is very application oriented, and it's praxis. It's theory informs practice, and practice informs theory. So we're busy doing it, and at least once every other year, I work as a director of photography on a major production inside the program, and then quite often I'm doing other projects on the side. We are the idea of publish or perish in academia is actually very valid and very true, and in the creative arts, that involves actually doing what you're teaching. So I get credit for, and I am encouraged to continue to make films and
That's awesome.
work on films.
Yeah.
So I've never really stopped it and switched and went into teaching. They run kind of at the same time.
Yeah.
I was going to say parallel, but it's not even parallel. It's so intermingled. It's so part of the same thing. And I get to go out on sets with students and help them do it, which sometimes is frustrating because I want to play, not just watch the other kids play.
So in film, it seems to me that it's very subjective. But you look at the Oscars and you look at the film, they try to categorize things. But as an academic, as a teacher, when you're grading students on their work, what's kind of the format? What are you looking for from that student to be able to give them an A versus?
So you're talking about assessments, and assessments, one of the problems with assessments, whether it's in STEM or in the arts, is...
And STEM being for those who may...
Science, technology, engineering, math.
Okay. And there's a lot of that in film today there's like God, who's the guy who made Avatar?
James Cameron.
James Cameron, like the intelligent folks behind the camera that brought that together.
Well, in film, there's a lot of science.
Yeah.
It used to be chemistry because it was photochemical.
Right.
Now it's digital, so it's a lot of computers. A lot of editing is all computers. Cameras are computers. But there's still optics, and there's still physics of light. Reaction of the sensor, electronics. So there's a lot of science going on, light meters. Understanding it. And it's not one of the things we're trying to teach folks. The discipline of being a professional is being intentional and having as much control over your tools as possible. So we're approaching from that kind of a direction. I have told my students this. I think grades often get in the way. And one of the things I'm trying to do with the students that I work with, I get people in their junior year and I walk with them, travel with them through their senior year. I'm trying to get them to move from a student mentality where they're working for a grade to a professional mentality where their work is bringing satisfaction, but the quality, they're striving for a quality not because of a grade, but because of who they are, something that's internal.
Yeah.
As Christians, there's transition that hopefully occurs sometime in college, but somewhere between probably high school and the end of college, where their faith becomes their own, where they're moving from their parents' faith to their own faith. And as artists, as professionals, you're moving from having the carrot be the grade to doing good work and understanding that hard work is of value.
Do you think there's any challenge specifically with universities like Liberty, or maybe, I don't know if ORU or Oral Roberts has a film program?
I believe they do.
They do. Even Regent here in Virginia Beach. Do you think there is any prejudice towards those schools when they go out in the secular world?
I'm obviously, depending on when you're watching this, it may change. I think up until now, that has been largely overstated. One of the things I think, I don't believe, if you go out and say, oh, I'm a graduate of XYZ Christian University, and you run into someone who has been burned by the church and is very anti-Christian, you're going to have some issues. But one of the things I talk with my students, all the students I've ever worked with, don't lead with, this is where I came from. Lead with good work.
Yeah.
Lead with quality and discipline. And film, people who work in film, it's a service industry. So if I'm serving you and I'm doing my job well, and you can see the integrity, the discipline, and the craft that's inside of me, then maybe you'll go, hey, where did you learn this? You're young. How did you know these things?
Yeah.
And then you can say, well, I went to, as institutions get more publicity, sometimes negative publicity, then people go, oh. And
that's where you explains
you did that. Because of where I received my MFA from.
And an MFA?
It's Master of Fine Arts. It's like a PhD, but in the arts. It's the highest terminal degree. Now there are PhDs in practice in arts, but for the longest time, the MFA was the highest degree, in the arts. One of the things, I didn't go to a Christian university for my MFA. I went to a very small, very progressive school. That's where the Lord led me. But I didn't go in there going, I'm a Christian. I went in there and didn't hide that I was a Christian, but I went in there to learn, to meet these people and to serve them and to get to know them. And then number of people said, oh, you're a Christian. I've never really met a Christian like you before. I think how we approach things shapes the way people think about it.
Yeah.
And we can be smart, or we can be egotistical and prideful. And egotistical and prideful never gets us anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it may have been my mother, but I've heard this quote before, is that sometimes you're the only God that a person will see. You're the only scripture that a person will read, is what they see in you. Mm-hmm. You carry the gospel, you carry Jesus where you go.
I've heard
you believe him or not.
Yeah, I've heard it quoted. Maybe it's a misquote, but I've heard that St. Francis of Assisi said, "Preach the gospel always, and occasionally use words."
That's good. That's really good.
Yeah, that idea of serving one another, I think, is part of the heart of Jesus and part of the heart of Christianity, and we can do that in whatever field God's called us to.
So, in the field of film, how did you end up? If you can summarize in a couple of minutes for me. Now you're here as a professor at Liberty University. What brought you into film as a young man? Where did it start for you?
I grew up on a dairy farm in upstate New York, and
You're like, get me out of here. I got to do something different.
Well, my mom and my stepfather were wonderful, and my mom was shaped by her cousin and how she grew up, and she didn't want to force anything on me in terms of do this.
Yeah.
Because she had seen how negative that was in a cousin of hers. And my stepfather, even though he was a dairy farmer, but he had gone to Cornell University and had a degree from Cornell in animal husbandry. He went to the ag school there. His mother was a teacher and had gone to college. So there was this heritage of college and understanding, and the world was kind of a bigger kind of space for them than a lot of other folks from their generation. And so they encouraged me to do whatever. The school I went to, the public school I went to, we went to plays quite a bit. We went to Stratford, Ontario, and saw Shakespearean plays. Shaw Festival and Niagara-on-the-Lake. So I saw theater, and we went to the Buffalo Philharmonic, and so I was exposed to the arts, and I really, really liked it. But I was an advanced AP math and science student because I tested well in math and science. And I came to the conclusion that's not what I wanted to do. And I started looking at radio and then television. And then I realized, after I realized that storytelling was separate from grammar, and grammar rules I didn't get along with.
Me neither. If anybody's seen my writing.
But I loved reading literature. My mother instilled in me and my stepbrother a love for reading, and I have always read good literature. So the idea of story and the importance of story and how narrative changes us and how narrative shapes how we see the world and the lens that we look at the world with. And then thinking deeper about philosophy and thinking deeper about, I loved poetry, which I kind of hid for a long time because poetry was for girls. But I loved poetry. So that all kind of led me into that. Then I started working in radio, and I loved the imagination of radio in the 70s when I was doing it. Radio has gone through some weird stuff, but it was very creative in the 70s.
Yeah, you were telling me off camera that one of your first jobs was in a radio station.
Yeah, I did some radio and did some commercials and that sort of work in college. But then right after college, I went to Dallas, Texas, and my first job in Dallas was at a 100,000-watt FM radio station. And I started off midnight to 6. And the station was converting from country gospel quartet music to Christian contemporary. And the midnight to 6 shift was the Christian contemporary. And so I was doing that. And then they moved me to morning
You were making
drive.
a bunch of Texans mad back then, weren't you?
Well, people loved it. And I had interesting theological audience because Dallas Theological Seminary is in Dallas, and they were listening. And Christ for the Nations was in Dallas, and they were listening. And Dallas Baptist College, which became Dallas Baptist University, I think, they were listening. So you had all these different folks that assumed that I was one of them, and they were listening to this Christian contemporary music, which was, it was only about maybe 2 feet of albums sitting on a shelf. That was all that there was in terms of the library. Randy Norman and, Barry McGuire and second chapter of Acts, and, it was all those pioneers in Christian contemporary music. So I was playing those and talking to people on the air and playing all these Bible shows, J. Vernon McGee and Through the Bible.
Oh, yeah.
So I was kind of getting a theological degree by listening to these preachers and playing Christian contemporary music and talking to Christians in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And I did that for a while.
That is a great radio voice. That sounded wonderful in my ears there, Doug. That's awesome.
Well, there was a time when I made a living with this voice. As you said earlier, I have a great face for radio.
Yeah, as do I.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. And we've got
and
cameras.
we got cameras on.
Something's wrong.
But this is the influence of Joe Rogan.
There you go.
The great podcaster extraordinaire.
And things. Isn't it a great world we live in that with people with faces like ours, we can still do this?
Still do it.
It's amazing. But
Well, Joe Rogan proved that there's hope. If you're a bald-headed guy and kind of gnarly looking,
there's more acceptance.
People go, wow, that's kind of good looking.
You got we can make it work to our advantage.
Right. Need all the help we can get, right?
There you go. I had also in college worked with crews doing rock and roll concerts coming into Syracuse and coming into Buffalo, and so I learned lighting, and I had done some lighting in theater, and so after radio, I went and worked at a television station in Dallas, and was on the production crew. Which I love production. I've always loved production. I loved production when we were doing radio, doing comedy shows, and doing editing and doing all that stuff that happens. So I moved into television, and then I started freelancing. I found God gave me a mentor who taught me lighting, and I was freelancing with him a lot, and started doing film.
Hence why your offspring over here is, I guess, in the lighting field now.
Well, he spent a lot of time on sets with me when he was little, really little. And his mom's a great producer-director, so he spent time on sets with her. So I think he was doomed.
Yeah, doomed to the industry.
Yeah.
And he's done some pretty cool stuff, though.
He's done some great stuff.
He was on before the whole COVID mess, and hence why we have what we have now is one man's chaos or misery is another man's opportunity. So my opportunity is that Ian got laid off from a couple of pretty big shows. I think we can say Swagger was one, and the other was The Walking Dead, one of their spinoffs.
That was supposed to come back last summer, but didn't because of the mess.
COVID.
Because of
everything gets blamed on COVID now.
Everything. Yes.
Yeah. I actually had some gutter work that needed to be done in my house from this last storm we had. And somehow the person couldn't show up to fix my gutter because of COVID.
Why?
Well, that was what I still, that was because of the current environment and COVID, we're going to have to reschedule your gutter repair. I'm like,
that's interesting. I don't quite understand.
I still haven't got an answer from that yet.
Yeah,
I won't embarrass the company because they do good work, but
and eventually they may come out and do your gutters.
Fix my gutter. Did you see it?
I did.
You're staying with us this weekend.
Yeah, I saw it kind of leading out.
Which that will bring me to a segue here to talk about one of our sponsors.
Oh, okay.
And, we're a big production now. We have sponsors.
Oh, sponsors.
I'm waiting on the check from your son now. We're waiting on a check from you. Yeah, right. So your son and my daughter hitched up, got married, and have given us both a grandson and one more on the way. So cheers to us, right?
Exactly.
Very soon.
Being granddad is a wonderful thing.
If we would have known that we could have had grandkids.
Well, skip right to the grandkids.
Start there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So awesome. But Ian and Sarah started a little coffee business. They roast their coffee, Miller House Coffee. This is wonderful coffee. They actually made a blend for me called Morning Call.
There you go.
Or for Kenneth Porter and Company, my financial firm. And so you can hear that. Smell the freshness in this.
There you go.
One day that technology will be there. Like I'll put this aroma in the mic.
There you go.
It'll push it through speakers.
Right through.
That will happen.
People will be doomed.
Horrible noise in the mics, right? But yeah, so they have this coffee business, and please help them. Please buy their coffee because the roaster is in my garage. So I'd like to park my car in there again one day. So buy all the coffee you can from Miller House Coffee.
And
MillerHouse.com.
And drink good coffee.
Yeah. MillerHouseCoffee.com. There you go. Drink good coffee. It's a sin to do otherwise.
It really is. Life is short. Drink good coffee.
I think that was in Martin Luther's.
I think one of his, it might be one of the ones that were dropped off the bottom.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It got cut off in the windstorm or the fire.
Yeah,
But it was there. It's kind of like the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Exactly. we will uncover it at some point in time in the future.
Jesus said, drink good coffee, or thou shalt.
Thou shalt drink good coffee.
Yeah. So there's your commercial, Ian. And that was without a script. So.
You improv'd well.
Yeah. So that's the fun thing about podcasts. We were talking about this earlier, is that you can just interview intriguing people and people that I enjoy and like, man, Doug, I want to know a little bit more about you, and we're going to do it in front of a camera. We're not going to edit it.
With some microphones.
With some microphones and some funny earmuffs.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually enjoy this because I have a tendency to be a little ADD, so it really forces me to hone in on what you're saying. So
Focuses.
I can appreciate it.
Because I'm kind of in your head. You're kind of in my head.
Yeah, that's scary.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
it is.
Tell me about being behind the camera. What is a director of? And you would think, okay, a director, I know what he's going to do, but from an expert, what is a director's job on a movie set?
Having read a whole lot of interviews and done it, but every director is slightly different depending on who they are and their personality. But probably the best way I can explain this is my belief. This is the way I operate. Story is this bigger thing. And out of story comes the script. So the script is an expression of the story. And the script, so story drives script. Script drives blocking. Blocking is how you move the actors around. And, cinema is motion. We're writing with motion. So we're writing this story. We're blocking the actors. They're moving around. They're acting. But everything relates back to that story. Then blocking drives camera. So the camera has to, it's a dance. Follow the blocking. Follow what the actors are doing. You go tight when the emotions call for it. You stay wide when the action needs to be wide. But there's also emotional distance. There's also, eye line. How directly is the actor looking at the camera? So how connected are you with the audience? You're trying ultimately to express to the audience this bigger thing called story. Then camera drives lighting. Lighting it deals with emotion.
Yeah.
All of this works with the audience's imagination, and there's a lot of literature about how art touches us with imagination and how imagination forms what we believe and forms and shapes who we are. So story drives script, script drives blocking, blocking drives camera, camera drives lighting. It all relates back to story. And the director is the keeper of the story and making sure that all of those other craftsperson are connecting back to that greater story and making the project that the director has visualized, that has in his heart, that he's trying to create. One of the things I tell my students is the director is the greatest servant on the set because the director has to do their job in order for everyone else to do their job. So the director has to serve everyone with an understanding of the story, of the object, of the goal, so that they can do their job to express that story.
So if we were looking at this like in a task organization, and your director's typically at the top of the food chain, who's boss on set?
Producers actually in film and television have some slight variations some variations in this, but on film, producer hires the director. And
is producer typically investor?
No. Executive producers usually are more... often someone gets an executive producer role when they have invested. Okay. But not all investors get executive producers or producer roles. Often executive producers are the ones who pull the project together, get the financing, get all of that to happen. And then producers, there's a lot of different flavors of producers. There's line producers. There's people who are producers and are pulling the talent together. So there's a lot of nuance in terms of the term producer. But the producer hires the director. And remember, he who hires can fire. So the director is responsible to the producer. But then the director, in terms of the execution of the film and the idea, they're the guy. They're the bus driver.
Yeah. So when I see the beginning credits of a movie rolling, talking about who directed the film, the executive producers, and then you'll see all these film companies or
Production companies.
production companies. Tell me about that. So you've got layers. It seems like sometimes.
Yeah, and obviously that will vary depending on the film, but Mel Gibson has his own production company, and so when he's doing a production, his production company has a piece of it and has a responsibility for it.
Mm-hmm.
The studio that's distributing it, it may be just a distribution deal, or they may have been part of the production deal. When it's a Netflix original, Netflix has executives and has people that are involved in it, and they're making sure that they're going to get what they need in terms of the product so that they can get a return on their investment. It's a business. It's an interesting field in a lot of ways because it's science and it's art, but it's also business. And so when you're seeing those production companies in the beginning or the end, they're folks who have a piece of it, who have a responsibility for it. They've invested in it either with money or with energy and creative juices, but they've got a piece of it. And sometimes, like, I'm blanking on his name, but Bad Robot is
Will Smith.
No,
not Bad Robot. That's iRobot.
That's iRobot, but Bad Robot is the production company for
the production. Look him up, Noah. Bad Robot.
Super 8. He was the director of Super 8. And I'm totally blanking on his name. He loves lens flares. So anyway.
They'll find it for us and tell us
go.
in a second.
J.J. Abrams.
J.J. Abrams.
So that's his production company, and so often, a lot of times, large directors like J.J. Abrams or Steven Spielberg will be producers as well as directors on it. One of the issues with being a producer and director is you've got to change hats because there's one thing in this world that and it's absolutely true in the arts, it's absolutely true in film. Everybody has a vested interest, and sometimes vested interests come in conflict with one another. So, and often the director, their vested interest is to get the perfect shot or the best that they can get and accomplish the goal that they're envisioning. And the producer needs to do it on time and on budget.
The fragility in movie making or any production, I had to learn this the hard way on the music side, that I thought, well, how hard can this be? I'll find and I worked with some folks in the music business in my real profession and the financial world. But I helped this young group who were really, really talented. There were a family of 11, and we took these 11 kids and made this band of 7. And me and a childhood friend who's a music producer and in the industry, I was the executive producer, which meant I was writing the checks.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't tell you A chord from C chord, but I understood business.
Mm-hmm.
But what I learned the hard way is that the fragility of having 7 different personalities in a band, a music producer, an executive producer, the music industry itself, and the ultimate end of that whole hodgepodge is the fans,
mm-hmm.
and how fickle fans can be about the music they listen to or the programming they watch. And the investment in the arts, the physical investment, the fiscal investment in the arts, not for the faint of heart.
No.
So often I think folks forget that the things that actually make it to Netflix or make it to a feature film, those that do not, the amount of investment that's gone into some of these films that have bombed,
Absolutely. And
scary.
One of the things while you were talking that made me think about, it's a sports team. Think about a professional NBA or soccer or any professional team. You've got all these egos that come together as the players, and then you've got a coach or a manager, and then you've got the owners who are financially investing in it. And making that work, we could all think of examples in any sport where on paper and the amount of money invested in the players was huge, and you think, oh, they're just going to win everything. But it couldn't gel. It couldn't come together. It couldn't work. And it crashed and burned. That world has protected themselves financially, because even when the team crashes and burns, the owners still make money. You don't have that safety net in the arts. And culturally, we don't value the arts quite the way we do other things.
Yeah.
So sadly, I think art education in the United States has really fallen off the map in the last 30 or 40 years, maybe longer. And I think culturally we're in a mess and poorer because of that. The record industry, one of the other things that kind of happened in my brain while you were saying that, the record industry has totally changed in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And going from back in the 70s and 80s, when there were only a handful of major labels, and they had an R&D department, and they developed artists, and they brought them in, and they nurtured them, and they brought them along. That all got thrown out in the 90s.
Yeah, the music industry calls that A&R.
Yeah.
Yeah, artist repertoire.
Yeah. R&D, research and development.
R&D, research.
But that's totally changed. The internet totally blew that up. One of the things as an academic, I guess, I love studying and looking at is chaos theory. And
a lot of that right now too.
Oh, a lot of that, and waves of change. The different changes or waves of change that happen when there's total innovation and a total change. We talked about Netflix. Netflix was a major game changer. I don't know. I'm probably older. Well, I am older than you. I don't know when you grew up how many networks were there.
ABC, CBS, NBC.
Okay, and then maybe a UHF station that was independent.
That you had to dial in.
Yeah, you had to switch over to another dial.
And then put the tinfoil on the rabbit ears to really get those stations in.
My dad.
Howard Stern was usually on those
weird stations off to the side.
Yeah.
My mom and dad weren't quite this way, but I had friends who they had remote controls for their television. It was called Kids. Hey, get up and change the station for me. And that happened quite a bit because it was a dial kind
That's
of thing.
so true. You guys have no idea what we're talking about over here, do you?
No, they've lived in a world that
they think clicker, remote, but for us it was clicking
the dial
in to dial into the next station.
I love little things that hang over, like that little icon on the computer that you click to save. It's a floppy disk,
right?
And most people don't know.
They're like, why did they make a picture of it? What is that?
And then I was editor-in-chief of a graphic arts magazine in college. And so cut and paste meant cutting and pasting. It meant with a razor blade and with a wax machine and pasting up a blue line to send it off to the printer. There's all those little things that hang on in editing. Nonlinear editing, we talk about bins. Well, I learned to edit with a razor blade and film and glue.
Wow.
So
literally taping together.
Yes, literally taping together.
Pieces of film.
And and pushing it and pulling pieces out and throwing it. It was destructive. But that's what we build on. That's where we all come from. And we go with that sort of thing. That's part of understanding the craft and understanding the discipline is knowing where you come from.
Yeah.
That's
what is the oldest camera? Like, do you prefer film still? Like, is that craft still?
If I had my druthers, I would shoot film. I've shot miles of 16 and 35 millimeter film, and I would shoot film in a heartbeat.
So for us lay people who don't understand that. So 16 millimeter, 35 millimeter. What does that mean when you say that?
It's the gauge. It's the size of the film.
Okay.
It's how
it's actually running through that reel, through the recorder.
Running through the projector, running through the camera, being exposed.
An average film that was shot back on film, not digitized. How many miles of film would an average feature-length presentation be?
Let me put it this way, because it kind of leads into why we don't do it. A 400-foot roll of Super 16 or 16 millimeter film is 10.5 minutes of
400 feet.
Yeah, and 1,000-foot roll of 35 millimeter film is about 10.5 minutes, and that's not finished screen time. That's your shooting. So, with waste and with missed takes and all of that sort of thing, you probably, if you're going to shoot a 5-to-1 ratio of how much screen time is the 1 and how much film you're shooting is the 5. So you're going to shoot 50 minutes of film for 10 minutes of screen time. So a 10-minute short film would take 5 rolls.
2,000 feet.
Yeah.
Half
16.
mile.
Yeah. And then when you start looking at costs, we're probably $250, $300 a roll. And so you're multiplying that times 5, and that's probably for the raw stock, and then processing is another, and transfer and all of that. So you're talking probably $2,500 to $4,000 for just the film stock. Now digital, a mag, you can reuse all the time, and so you don't have that cost. So it makes the economics better because you can take that money and then invest it into production design or into actors or crew or that sort of thing. So, the industry probably since 2000 has largely shifted into digital production, and digital cinema kind of came of age probably about 15 years ago. It was fully baked and it was really good. So people in Hollywood, and when we're talking about Hollywood, they may shoot 100 rolls, and they're shooting 35, which is probably 3 times the cost of 16.
Jeez.
So we're talking, it could easily be 30 or 40 grand just for the film stock. So when you're talking about 120 million, that's not a whole lot. But when you're talking about, an independent feature, that's a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
But the flexibility that George Lucas had when he started shooting digital, Roger Deakins, who worked with the Coen brothers quite a bit, and won an Oscar in the last Oscars for 1917, I believe. He's amazing. He shifted away from actual film and shooting digital. So that's the progress of. It's been driven economically, but it's also been artistic in terms of flexibility. One of the things I heard someone say, and I don't remember who said it, so I can't quote them, but they said, the beauty of digital is that we have so many possibilities. The horror of digital is that we have so many possibilities to screw it up. So,
So it sounds to me that if you, in the old film days, there could be miles and miles of tape.
Not
5,280 feet is a mile. So
film. The plastic. It's not celluloid. It used to be celluloid, but the plastic. If you think you shoot 100 rolls of 35 millimeter, 100,000 foot rolls, so you've got 100,000 feet, and that's wouldn't be uncommon for a
20
feature
miles.
film. Yeah.
Jeez.
That's when I say I've shot miles and miles, I'm not exaggerating.
Yeah.
I've shot over,
Then I think about when you start breaking down your industry, like documentary films. Like I've got a friend in the financial business, or associate, I should say, that created a documentary film with a documentary filmmaker, a guy named Doug Orchard, called The Power of Zero. I think you watched it. This tax movie.
Yeah, I did.
But it took them over 2 years to put that film together. And it took a number of economists to pull them together in interviews and go, hey, we're going to put you on record in this documentary film about where taxation in our country is headed. And, so again, I bring it back to the fragility of that, you get this idea, you want to go interview a number of people, and they go, I don't want to be on film. I don't want to be quoted.
Can't go on the record.
Can't go on the record. And what David McKnight and Doug Orchard did in this film, The Power of Zero, if you haven't watched it, you should. It's important to educate yourself about the fiscal state of our economy as well as the political state that we're in. But, yeah, I thought about that, and, man, the time it took. In a documentary, you're not out there making $1 bazillion doing a documentary film. It's a labor of love.
It used to be worse. Ken Burns kind of changed things radically around. It's been changing slowly. But with Netflix and Amazon Prime, the audience for documentaries has grown. And with the audience growing, and then with YouTube...
Demand goes up.
Yeah. And people, because we were talking about them being ABC, NBC, CBS being the three networks when we were kids.
Yeah.
Now everything's splintered and there's so much diversity. The good side of that is, as an audience, you can watch whatever you want to watch. And if you're interested in something, you can go pursue it. And that means, as a filmmaker, you got to think through, okay, is there a big enough audience to make this viable? And probably there is, if you keep your expenses low. And there's lots of folks that are actually making a living off of YouTube and, getting a couple million subscribers and a couple million views and getting checks and, and doing well. Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire guys.
Love Ben Shapiro.
I do too. They're moving.
We'll probably be hated for saying that we love
probably
Ben Shapiro.
Probably, but I can't deny it.
Yeah.
But they couldn't exist 20 years ago because they need YouTube, they need the internet. They're
Doug, I
business
couldn't even
models.
have done this 5 years ago.
Exactly.
To do what I'm doing now, and I'm doing this out of a labor of love. I'm not here to try to monetize it. Although if Blue Label wants to help and Miller House wants to help, we'll take their sponsorship.
Exactly.
But I do this because it's fun, and then I have this studio to do my real craft of financial planning.
Mm-hmm.
But I just love interviewing intriguing people like yourself that have something to add to this world.
One of the things I think, when I first heard you were doing this, it clicked, and I was like, well, that makes a great deal of sense. Because knowing people's stories, how did they get from where they are? Story, this is part of the art and craft that I love. Narrative story shapes our world, and we make meaning through story. Story takes the chaos and sorts it out and goes, okay, this is important, this is important, this is important, and puts it together in an order that we can go, oh, well, that makes sense. And when we hear other people's stories, especially if it's someone we identify with, it gives us hope. Well, they succeeded. They had these issues. I'm having these issues. They had these issues. Why did Jesus tell parables? He told stories. A lot of the Bible is story. Story shapes the way we understand things. Imagination, which art, film in particular, film is an experience. Film touches our imagination. And in that process, it shapes us and changes us, and we make meaning.
I can relate to story.
Mm-hmm.
I was that student, and I can tell you my high school and collegiate professors would say I was the kid. It was hard to get them to pay attention. I think I was probably undiagnosed ADD at the time, but if my teacher was a very good storyteller, like I loved my public speaking class. A guy named Don Taylor was our teacher. Don, shout out to you, Mr. Taylor. But he was a great storyteller, and I had a Bible teacher, a guy named Bill Price, who I didn't. I shouldn't say I didn't crack the Bible open during Bible class.
Yeah, I can't say that.
Can't say that. My dad would roll over and
smack you.
Get him. But he brought it alive in how he could shape and shift a message that I would lean in, and I knew I was interested when I would lean in and go, okay, tell me more.
I probably shouldn't admit this being now a professor, but in 8th grade...
Remember, we're not going to edit it.
Exactly.
So it's out there.
In 8th grade, I found out later, in 8th grade, I actually failed and English, and they promoted me. Mr. Tate believed enough in me to promote me. I must have been right on the cusp, but I failed. And Tom Durham, Mr. Durham, was my 9th grade English teacher. And he had the ability to watch me during the first part of the year and decide whether I had to go back and repeat 8th grade English or whether I could go on. And that year was the year that I understood what literature was. And I understood story, and I came to a place where I started having more depth about things. I'd been reading since probably 4th or 5th grade. My mother took me to the library every week, and we would check out books. But it was 9th grade with Mr. Durham that I started understanding what literature was and story. And then Mr. Durham was also the director of the musicals, and we did a musical every year. And from 7th grade on, I was in the musicals, usually in the background somewhere. But we did Oliver, and I was a wretched little boy. And then I always had these little minor parts. Sometimes I had lines, sometimes I didn't. But I was usually in the dance numbers because I was an athlete, and the choreographer always said, "We need men, get that guy."
You could cut a rug, couldn't you, Doug?
I could, occasionally. Or at least I didn't step on the girls' feet too often. But it was Mr. Durham that really sparked a fire in me in terms of loving story and understanding that the rules of grammar are important, but story is actually so much bigger, so much more. And that communication, you've got to follow the rules in order to clearly communicate, but you got to get beyond the rules to really move people and touch their imagination.
There's a guy in Tennessee with your last name, Donald Miller, in Nashville, who's very good at helping business people craft their story. I think he wrote a book called Story Brand, which, if you haven't read it, we'll put that on.
It's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, it's a great book for, I would say, young and old entrepreneurs alike. That if you want to craft your message and get your story out, and I'm still learning more from that.
And necessary, I think, this day and age with the internet. What I do craft-wise, if you boil it down to the very bottom, it sounds highfalutin to say we do movies. We do movies and television, but what we really do is tell stories with pictures. And that idea of how we make meaning and how we tell stories with pictures. This day and age, we live in a very visual culture, and everyone needs to be communicating and telling their story with pictures. And everybody thinks, oh, I've got a camera, I'm a cinematographer. Yeah, that's not true. Finding people who are professionals at it and can help you craft and tell your story effectively with pictures is worth all the money that you're going to pay for it. So that's a shameless plug for my friends and me who are out there doing these kinds of things.
But there is absolute truth in that. I've been a user of your industry now, and I would concur with that statement that I've seen productions and even experienced it as a buyer. That if there's something being promoted on one end and that information is not produced well. It doesn't have to be overproduced, but if it's just bad, I exit. I leave before they maybe get to the climax of their story to maybe sell the message they want to share with me.
Well, even take it even another layer. There's so much noise, and there's so much going on there. what grabs people's attention and will get an audience is quality. And I talk about the little old lady in Des Moines. The little old lady in Des Moines doesn't care about what cameras you're using, doesn't care about what microphone you're using or the lights. She just wants to be moved. She wants to be interested. She doesn't want to be bored. And if those things get in the way, she's out of it. She's no longer in the story. If those things are transparent and she doesn't even notice those things, then she can be caught in that world and be moved. Yeah. And that's what she's shooting for. That noise where you've got all these stuff going on out there. Well, what gets your attention? Most of us are sophisticated about social media and understand that there's an attention economy, that people are making money off of getting people's attention. So with so much noise,
that's good.
How do you get and hold people's attention? Google has thousands of people that their job is to figure out ways to addict us and keep our attention. We could probably do another podcast and talk about my theories and ideas about what paying so much attention, this next generation, to screens and not seeing people face to face, what that's doing and some of the ramifications and some of the subtlety and nuances of that.
Give us a 30-second synopsis of that. What do you think it is doing?
I think it's, without getting into the whole spiritual ramifications, I think it's separating human beings. I think people are having a harder time reading and communicating and understanding because, dogs and horses can watch, or they're keen observers of body language, of facial features and expression. When you're separating young people from seeing people and talking face to face, and you're reducing things to text or to a screen, they don't then read, and so then they misread, and they look at someone's face, and big things they can see, like films, explosions, going off, but then they miss the subtlety of really good acting. Big smiles.
Do you think there's a separation with young people today? And picking on, I think we have the greatest generation ahead of us with potential, as it relates to potential.
Absolutely.
But that ability to tap that potential and all the resources they have around today. We were talking about that this morning over coffee, that we have a very lazy society. We want the easy button.
Well, I think one of the big problems we have is there's so much facts and so much information at our fingertips, and it's so easy to get that information. We lose the idea that knowledge is something different, and then wisdom is something even different than knowledge. So we can know about something, not to put too fine a point on it, we can know about God without knowing God. I can know about Kenneth Porter, but unless I spend time with him and laugh with him and cry with him, we can. One of the things that God has brought me up on, we can sit and talk to someone about the loss of a loved one, but we're not really relating to them unless we sit and cry with them. And that takes work. That's a cost to sit and genuinely, weep with and experience sorrow with someone because they are grieving, because they are in sorrow. To walk along someone with their lived experience that might not be our lived experience, but to take the time and the effort and walk along with them, that costs something. And we have become less and less willing, both Christian and non-Christian, both in the church and outside the church, we have become less and less willing to do that and to step outside of our comfort and walk along.
Would it be cliche-ish and bring it back to a movie? There was a movie called White Men Can't Jump.
Yeah.
And Woody Harrelson and who was the actor across from him? The black guy.
Yeah.
Who could jump. No racial profiling there, but
No.
just, it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he said, you hear Jimi Hendrix. I listen to Jimi Hendrix. And the difference was in that scene is that Woody Harrelson's character just, he couldn't get out of his own way. That he had the same sound that the guy Blade, Wesley Snipes, thank you. Wesley Snipes was trying to get through to Woody. Look, man, you have to stop sometimes and just listen, and hear with intent would be the definition of listen. I think the intent to learn, the intent to be able to apply information in a way that can improve you from where you are to where you want to be.
I took a course in undergrad called Symphonic Literature, and it was taught by Dr. Joseph Winsense, which tells you how important it was to me because I remember that, and that was like Stone Age ago. The first day, he said, "You think you know how to listen. I'm telling you can barely hear." When I tell my students in Intro to Cinematography, you think you can see, I'm going to teach you how to really look and how to see. And there's an intent, the intentionality about looking and seeing and hearing. And most of the time, we're almost in a sleep-wake state where we think we're awake, but we're really not. We're not aware of our surroundings. We see something that's how optical illusions work, is our brain goes, oh, that's what this is. Yeah. And, we walk around in that and we're not aware. I see students walking down the hall all the time looking at their phones, and they walk into things. They're just totally immersed in that screen, and they're not present. That we tend to live in our past or the future, and rarely do we live in the present. And bringing us into the present is critical. It's really important.
So we got about 3 minutes left. As an academic and what you're teaching your students, what are you telling them 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10 year? Where's your industry? Where's the film industry headed, in your opinion?
I think we're, again, chaos theory and kind of, you've got to look at that to prognosticate where things are going. I think the next breakdown is going to be a further breakdown in distribution and centers of power. Content creators are going to become, much like the music industry, content creators are going to become much more directly linked to their audience. Building a community, building an audience, getting people to be invested. Social media, one of the great failures of people who aren't in their 20s in understanding how to leverage and use social media. Social media is push-pull. It's not just push out information. But it's also hearing back.
That's good.
That interactivity and that community building. And I have a whole lot of thoughts about relationship and Martin Buber and I-you kinds of relationships. We need to have an I-you relationship with our audience where we treat them not like butts in seats or eyeballs and monetize them by clicks and by numbers. We need to look at them as being human beings and have they're intelligent and contributing to our art and to our work.
10 years from now, if you were a betting man, do we have movie theaters that are defined as what we know as movie theaters today.
No.
So the reason I asked that is tonight we're going to watch a movie, your family, my family, in the back of a pickup truck at of all places at a plant. What is
A
that?
nursery.
A nursery. Yeah. So we're going to a place where you'd buy plants, but we're going to go sit in their parking lot and watch a full feature film. And I guess the way they're piping in the sound is through our FM radio. So find a signal, pipe in the sound,
They'll be broadcasting.
and broadcasting the film,
Yeah.
the visual on a big sheet.
On a big screen.
Yeah,
COVID has brought back the drive-in theater.
it's cool.
It very is. It very much is. I think, there are certain things that you asked me 10 years, will it be there? I don't think it will. Not the way we see it today. Maybe it will be an art house kind of thing.
Kind of a full experience, like some of the draft houses and food, like sit down.
I think we'll play with that. I think human beings will always want to get together.
Community, yeah.
And I think the shared experience, I think that will always be there. I don't think the way it is right now and the way it's monetized right now will last 5 years. Maybe between 5 and 10 is where I think it'll be gone or be changed radically. But that, the drive-in coming back because of COVID, the nursery showing a film, people want that kind of experience. We always will be telling stories with pictures. We will always be telling stories. Stories are, God wired us for story.
That's good.
And he knows he does that. So we're always going to be doing that.
Yeah.
It's the technology, it's the building, it's the brick and mortar, it's the monetizing, it's the power structure. Those things will change. But the fact that we always need and it will always have story and always be seeking out story that changes us and transforms us, that will always be there. How that's delivered, internet, in your own home, a home theater, all of that modifies and changes.
So in closing today, I always like to ask, what are you reading now? What's your and all my Christian friends always say the Bible, so you can't use that. Everybody else beat you to that.
I guess I'm not a Christian friend because I wasn't going to say that. Although I do that on a daily basis, but that's not what I was going to say. I was given a book recently, 2 weeks ago, and I'm reading it. It's called The Essential Haiku, and it goes through Basho and Isa, and there's a third poet. I can't remember what his name at the moment, Bashan. So it's Japanese, and it's haikus. And then I'm also reading Problems of Art by Susanna Langer.
Problems of Art.
Problems of Art.
Okay.
And she's a philosopher, phenomenologist.
You get both those on Amazon or at your local bookstore?
I got one out of the library, and I think the other one you could get on Amazon.
Okay.
I'm reading that, and then I'm continuing to read some Thomas Merton. So light reading.
That's yeah. Well, I see how non-cultured I am because neither one of those am I aware of, but I'll go check them out.
There you go.
So I could spend another couple hours with you, Doug. We'll have to do it off camera at the house.
Please.
Over a cup of coffee.
Love it.
But I've got to depart now because a chapter has ended for one man today. I'm going to a wake of a client of mine who was served in our nation's military, served in the United States Navy, retired Lieutenant Commander Winter. Cheers to you, sir. Fair winds, following seas, we have the watch. And with that, I'll end and say thank you for joining me today and gracing us with your presence.
My pleasure.
I love you.
Love you too.
Moses loves you, and the rest of that gang does too.
Love them. Couldn't have life without them.
Yeah. Cheers to you, Doug. Thank you.